Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage. If this is your first time visiting the channel, go ahead, click on subscribe, and also click on that bell to receive all the updates and activities on the channel. Alright, so this is probably the final video in this LS swap into this 1976 C3 Corvette. If this is your first time viewing any of the videos, go ahead and click on the playlist. It's going to basically get you up to speed as far as everything that went into the swap. And it's also going to include the full parts breakdown and cost as far as what the total bill went into. So with that being said, it's been about a year, right, since we started this, and the time has come. So let's go for a ride. So it's been about 6 weeks since we finished off the car. Today is July 29th, I think, Sunday. Might be incorrect in the date, but at this point I put on probably about 600 to 800 miles on the car. So enough time has gone by to address any issues or problems that I may have had, and really kind of, you know, get over the honeymoon phase and really kind of talk about what has happened with the car. So I'll just get this right out of the way. I have zero regrets on doing the swap. The 5.3 has absolutely transformed this car. The car is a lot more fun to drive. It's such more engaging and responsive. I've made comments in some of my other videos that I no longer live in fear of the random minivan and Toyota Corolla at a stoplight. This car absolutely gets up and goes, and with it only being a 5.3. So as far as any issues I have encountered since the swap, I had one. During the first 2 weeks of the swap, I had a check engine light come on, and it was for two things. I had a code for a unexpected idle and a detonation code on the front detonation center closest to the water pump. So what it turned out to be was the intake on the Ram was coming into contact with the top side of the water pump pulley when the engine was under load. So what happened was when the engine was torquing back under hard launches or starts, the water pump pulley would actually make contact with the housing of the Ram, and it would cause the whole intake to flex, and which would result in causing the MAP sensor to go out of alignment with the intake loop, and it actually will cause an air leak. So what I did was I relieved the housing on the intake of the Ram, so it would no longer make contact with the water pump pulley. And since I've done that, I put on about 400 to 500 miles on the car with no check engine light. So that issue has been resolved. And other than that, that has been the only issue that I've had. I've had no issues with stalling out, bogging, or anything like that. The car has been running great. As far as temperature-wise, as far as what the engine runs at, so right now we have two temperature sensors to read, right, to monitor the temperature in the car. The first one is hooked up to the mechanical gauge within the car, and the second one is the one on the driver's side head, which is the stock location for the 5.3, and that one is monitored by the PCM. So between the two, right, because they exist within different areas of the coolant bath, the one in the car, that one reads lower than the one on the PCM by about 10 degrees, right? So if I look at the gauge within the car, it pretty much runs at 195, 198, right? As accurate as these things may be, right? The one on the PCM, which is the one that is on the driver's side head, that one consistently reads around 201 to 203. At a stoplight, sitting at traffic, at the very most, it will creep up to 208, 209. And then at that point, the fans on the radiator will kick in, and the temperature will drop right back down to 201, 203. So, as a result, this car has no issues as far as being daily driven in stop-and-go traffic or anything like that. So, like I said, today is July 29th, I think, and for the past 2 or 3 weeks up in the Northeast, we've had very hot weather. We just actually came out of a stretch where it was between 95 and 97 for the better part of a week, week and a half, with a lot of humidity. And even with the temperature being that high, I never had any issues with the car overheating or anything like that. It always ran great. So as far as the car just having any running issues, I've had zero. It runs very, very well. Doing the upgrade to the Champion 3-Core with the E-fans was well worth a $600 investment, because at this point I don't have to worry about any type of overheating issues or anything at all. Why don't we talk about radiant heat as well, right? So if you have a C3, you already know what I'm talking about. During the summer, these cars will act like little convection ovens, right? It gets to the point where if during the summer, if it's like 95 degrees, the transmission tunnel will heat up, the floors will heat up, and then there's so much convectionary heat that's transferred out of the engine bay into the passenger compartment. They really kind of become unbearable not to drive. And this car was no different with the small block. So the car originally had long tube headers, and those headers generated a ton of heat. And I can tell you from my own experience, as soon as the temperature got anywhere between 85 and 95 degrees, this thing would actually roast you out, and it would make it a very unbearable experience going forward. Now with the LS, right? So again, we made a conscious decision to not put shorty headers or long tube headers on the car, right? Because I already knew how the car ran with the small block. So I made the decision to use a cast iron manifold from the truck that came with the engine, and then we installed the 2.5-inch exhaust with no cast. As a result, this car no longer heats up, right? You do still get a little bit of heat off the transmission tunnel, but the floors are completely cool. The firewall is completely cool, and I've been in this car for an hour and a half driving during the summer, and I'm just as comfortable in this with the T-tops off and the windows down than I am in my truck. So doing that setup, again, it's been a side benefit, and again, it was a cost-saving venture as well of not doing the headers. As far as the Turbo 350 and the LS, right? So we made the decision to use the existing Turbo 350 and the same gearing in the rear end and the stock torque converter that was on the small block, and I just wanted to see how it ended up at. So with that configuration, with the way it is, the car is completely happy, right? No issues. It has plenty of get up and go. The only thing I've noticed was, and it was the same thing with the small block, where I'll call it, it's like a jackrabbit shift, where it wants to immediately shift out of first into second, probably right around 8 miles an hour. So it wants to get out of first gear almost immediately. And if you have a turbo 350, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's fine because, you know, I guess it's probably for efficiency or whatever to get in the second gear. But as far as performance off the line, it's not the best. I would just downshift to first gear on the selector. I would just hold it in first gear, and then I'll mainly shift it to second and go from there. And doing that method, it really makes the car more fun. But right now we are on a back road in the town where I'm at, and it's just, you know, just a nice road to get on and just kind of talk and not have to worry about too much traffic, not have to really worry about anything. As far as upshifting on the car, there's no issues. As far as having the vacuum source hooked up to the intake, like we described during one of the videos, doing that, it works fine. The transmission upshifts perfectly fine, no problems. So as far as downshifting, right, you probably know what I'm going to talk about. This car, the way it's set up, it has a kickdown cable, and to the best of my knowledge, there's not a company that's out there that makes a kit that will allow you to hook up turbo 350 to a drive-by cable setup on the throttle body. So right now, the kickdown cable is not hooked up. In the event that, you know, I'm going and I want to downshift, you have to downshift manually. But again, with the LS, there's enough torque and horsepower in third gear. It's perfectly fine of being able to pass somebody without having to downshift second manually. As far as horsepower, the goal in this car was never to make 400, 500 horsepower, right? Because again, this car is a daily driver, and as far as return on investment, it just makes no sense. And, you know, I follow a lot of Corvette groups on Facebook and everything else, and I watch their builds and everything else. And a lot of them are pretty interesting, and you know, a lot of people are out there trying to get 500, 600 horsepower and everything, or something along that lines. But again, as we're driving by, as we're going down this road, this is pretty typical of my driving situation. Single lane roads, twisty, curvy in the Northeast, where, you know, you really don't have an advantage to, you know, take advantage of 600 horsepower. Because again, it's one of those things, you have to realize these cars are 45, 50 years old. They have no safety equipment. You have seat belts, and then you have a collapsible steering column, but you have no anti-lock brakes, you have no stability control, you barely have a front bumper, right, on this car. And it's one of those things where if you do put 500 or 600 horsepower in a car like this, you also have to make the concession of you should also be upgrading the brakes as well as the steering components, because when these cars were developed back in the 60s and 70s, if if there was an option for like a 454 or something like that, you'd probably be looking around between 350, 400 horse at the kind of very limit, at the very top of the list. And again, these cars are never designed to maintain or handle 500 horsepower. So again, if you're going to go down that road to do it right and make it be smart, you also should be upgrading the brakes, the suspension, and the driveline. But it's another thing where you have to ask yourself, going back to the safety stuff, the question you need to ask yourself is, how fast do you want to die, right? Because like I said, if you put in all this horsepower into a car like this and you get into trouble, you get into an accident, you're probably going to get hurt, right? Seriously. And it's one of those situations where I want to try to avoid. I like breathing, I like walking, I like being able to talk at the end of the day. So again, I made a decision to kind of just go with the stock horsepower of the 5.3. So if you look at the that the horsepower ratings on that 5.3 on the LM7, depending on what you read, you're probably around 285, 300 horsepower. So this car is not running air conditioning. There's no catalytic converters, and it's running a true 2.5-inch dual exhaust. So I haven't dynoed it yet. It hasn't been tuned yet. I'm going to say probably more than likely this car is probably pushing around 300, 310 just by my butt dyno. Right? As far as what it feels like, I feel it's probably around 300, 310, which is fine. So again, would I go down the road of adding more power? Maybe, but again, I'm in the Northeast. This car is going to be probably driven maybe 2 or 3 months out of the year, if I'm lucky, depending on good weather. And again, it's one of those things, it makes no sense to put a ton of money in a car that's just going to be static and idle in my garage 9 months out of the year. So I'll enjoy the 300 horsepower that it has now, and it's fine. So the next topic goes into LS groups and projects and everything else. And this goes back to the whole horsepower discussion. Like I said, I made the decision not to open up the engine at all. I knew the engine was a known runner, and before I bought it, so I know the risk was minimal. But if you go on the Facebook groups and the old forums that are out there, there are so many people who get sucked in to the LS swap scenario where they just read people's build threads and everything else. They say, oh, I can do that. I can take an LS, or I can take an engine apart and engineer it on my own and develop 500 or 600 horsepower. But the problem is, as far as a mechanical ability or like an engineering ability, they don't truly know what they're doing. They're basically getting some partial information, and they don't truly understand how Part A interacts with Part B and then gives you a result of C. So what I've seen, and a lot of people probably will agree with me, is that there's a lot of people who will get sucked into going into a build, and they will buy all these parts. They'll tear the engine open, and then they'll install the parts. More often than not, it's incorrectly, or there's another underlying issue that they're not aware of or they don't understand, and then they put everything back together. They put it in the car, and they're having issues with it. And they don't understand what's going on, and they don't have the ability to figure out what the issue at hand is. So what will happen is, a lot of these people will post for help back in the groups and say, I did this and I have issue, XYZ, and some people are very supportive and everything else, but most of the time people will just get lit up and offer no help at all, or the help that they have is just incorrect. And then projects will tend to go stagnant and stale and never get completed, and people will get frustrated, and then they sell whatever they're working on and call it a day. So going back to how that refers back to me, I did not want to get into that type of scenario again. So I know my limitations. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, so I know I do not have the engineering background to say, hey, this part works for this and this and this, and I'm gonna have a great outcome. I knew my limitations. I knew I had a good engine from the get-go, and I just slapped it in the car, and we made the right purchases on the parts that we put around it versus spending money on internal engine components that may have no effect on it. And again, so here we are basically under a year since the original 350 went down, and this car is running and driving with 65 pounds of oil pressure at 2200 RPM, and it's running at 195 as we're going down the road on a Sunday with the temperature being 90 degrees, and I am perfectly happy. I have no issues with the car, and I would absolutely do this again as we turn around on this corner. So we're going to downshift, then into third gear. And that's what it's all about, folks. You want to get your stuff done and, you know, enjoy your project and not have it sit in your garage or your shop forever and a day, and your wife and your girlfriend or whoever is wondering, when is this thing going to be done? When are you going to be able to enjoy it? When are you going to have the good feeling back in your body versus going out to the garage and just walking by and say, I'm so sick and tired of working on this thing. So again, that's just my perspective, but I think at the end of the day, everybody wants to be in their project car on a day like this and having a good time and able to enjoy it and not just spend countless hours of just fucking around and trying to figure out what is going on and trying to overcome the next step and get the car up and running. Alright, so what we're doing, we're coming up to a stoplight, and what we'll do is we'll kind of get on it. I'm going to downshift to first, hold it down there, and kind of line the car out and kind of give you guys an idea of the performance of the car and go from there. Alright, so we're in first gear. Already up to 75 miles an hour in that brief stint. So there's a little brief example of the performance on the car. We no longer live in fear or live in the shadows of minivans and crossovers and Toyota Corollas and knowing that they can embarrass you and say, hey, why are you so slow? Just in that little brief stretch, first, second, we were already up to about 75 miles an hour. So like I said before, when we first got in the car, it's been completely transformed with only roughly quote-unquote 300 horsepower. We'll cover it is the fuel pump, the Holley fuel pump. I've had no issues with that at all. No starvation issues as far as going around the corner or getting on it. We've never had a feeling that the car was having a starvation issue where it was just sucking up air. So far, with about 600 to 700 miles on the car, and the Holley fuel pump is working as it intended. And again, it's one of those things where we could have went with the external fuel pump, but with all the research I've done, people just said, you know, just avoid those. Yes, they are the cheaper way to go, but as far as the long run and, you know, keeping your sanity, having the pump inside the tank is the way to go. You don't hear it when it's running, there's no strange noises, and it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So I would definitely recommend the Holley fuel pump. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive, but as far as a drop-in solution where you don't have to do anything else, I think honestly that's the way to go. one last thing I guess we'll talk about as far as the serviceability of the LS versus the small block that was in there. Honestly, I think it's better because of the way the LS is packaged and everything else. Even though, yes, you're dealing with fuel injection and everything else, as far as the service items that you have to worry about, spark plugs and stuff along that line, on my setup, because again, I'm running the stock manifolds, everything is very accessible. There's no issues. Plenty of room as far as to get in there with your hands and do what you need to do. I had to get under the car before this morning because I had to tighten up the radiator clamp on the lower hose because it was leaking a little bit. And again, I was able to get underneath the car, and yeah, minor thing. Took me 10 seconds to tighten up the clamp, but again, it's one of those things. So I guess we can say we've had two problems with the car since we finished the swap, you know, and the radiator one was number 2. But again, a minor issue. So if you look at everything that's gone into the car, only having those 2 issues, I think we're doing pretty good. So at this point, what we'll do, if you made it this far, stick around a little bit longer. We'll get back home, and then we'll talk about the final bill as far as what went into this car, what we ended up spending, and any further costs that I may have. And I mentioned that the water pump, the pulley was actually hitting on the intake housing of the Ram. So if you look down there, you'll see this the rub mark on the water pump pulley and basically what it was. So there's the Ram. So what was going on? It was molded in such a way that it was pretty much sitting right on top of the pulley. And what would happen is when the engine was under load, the engine would kick up, make contact with the pulley, and then kind of lift the whole intake housing up and basically flex the mass airflow sensor, which caused the unexpected idle condition and the detonation code. So all I did was just relieved it back behind the forward of the water pump pulley, and since I've done that, 0 issues. All right, so there you go. So those are my driving impressions, any issues I encountered, and you know, general thoughts and concerns. So like I said, I have no regrets. I would definitely do it again. I thought it was a fun project, and again, this was a budget build. The intent was not to put $15,000 into this engine because again, it's just a daily driver. You know, the car needs a paint job. So if you look right there, if you have never noticed, you know, that spot, it's the paint's coming off the car, off the front of the bumper, and that spot is getting progressively bigger and bigger year by year. So at some point this car will need paint, and but we'll tackle that later on down the road. So as far as budget, if you look at the description of the video, what you'll see is the final parts list as well as the price breakdown. And just remember that prices are subjective, and what it may be today, if you're watching this video 5 years from now and you're wondering how the hell did this person do it for X amount of dollars, that's why, because 5 years have gone by. But as far as where we ended up at, it was $5,000, right? So I think we did pretty good, because when I originally kind of forecasted out and did a rough estimation as far as what I was going to need, I think I came around between $3,500 and $3,800, right? Knowing everything I knew at that point. So, but actually two things that kind of made us go over the budget. One was the radiator, because my plan was originally to reuse the radiator that was there. We decided to change it when we had the opportunity. The second one was the exhaust, because again, I was going to try to reuse the exhaust, but once I got it under the car, I just said, you know what, there's no sense in trying to save this, because it made no sense. So between the cost of the parts of the radiator and the exhaust, you're roughly looking around $1,100, $1,200, right? So basically, with those two things, that's kind of how we got up to $5,000. But as far as the total cost of the project, right? So, you know, I took the 350 out and I managed to sell some of the parts and pieces off the 350, which basically, with that stuff being sold, it kind of drove down the cost like $4,500. So, so at the end of the day, $4,500 for an LS swap that's driving and running and is perfectly capable of doing what I want to do. I think it's pretty good. So again, this is the first time I've ever did something like this, and not knowing really what I was getting into. I think we did pretty good. So, but yeah, so go ahead, check out the description and the parts breakdown and the cost. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I know through some of the comments that I've been getting on the playlist and everything else, everything that we're doing is actually helping out a lot of people, because you know, I know there's a lot of owners. They may not necessarily be C3 owners, but they kind of stumble across the video and you know, they're using this as kind of like a good information source as far as what the true cost is going to be. And, you know, it then allows them to make the decision whether they want to get into something like this or they're going to do something else. So again, I'm not saying my way is the right way or whatever, but this is the path I took to do the swap into my car. So for anybody that's been commenting on the videos, I thank you. And again, if there's any additional questions, let me know and I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. So if you made it this far, I truly appreciate it. So like I said, this will probably be the last video in the build on the LS swap. I don't think there's really anything else that we need to cover, because again, the car is running and driving. But it won't be the last time you see the C3, because there's some other stuff that we need to do with it and go from there. Because again, car is 45 years old or whatever it may be. So there's always something to do. It never ends. So, all right. So as always, thanks for watching. And again, like I said, if there's any questions, let me know and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And always have a great day and good luck with your own project. See ya.